All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us during this Accreditation in Public Relations informational session. My name is Patrick Thielen, and I'm the current Accreditation Chair for our San Diego and Imperial Counties PRSA chapter. Before we begin today's session, I will pass the baton to our chapter's treasurer and member of the executive committee, Gina Vasquez, who would like to say a few words. Gina.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Gina Vasquez. I see some familiar names and faces here, but just wanted to say hello on behalf of our local PRSA chapter. I'm the current treasurer and a member of our executive committee. Just wanted to share a little bit about the organization that's bringing this webinar to you. PRSA San Diego Imperial Counties is one of more than 100 chapters within the PRSA organization, which is the world's largest and foremost organization of public relations professionals. Our local chapter offers a broad range of professional development activities such as this, aimed at strengthening the skills of our members. So we just wanted to thank RMG Communications and Reliance Public Relations for sponsoring this event, as well as our presenters here from UC San Diego. RMG Communications and Reliance Public Relations are also the sponsor of our local APR program, so thank you to them. Their contribution will help our chapter support professionals in preparing for their accreditation and growing in that journey. So thank you again, and thanks to all of you for joining. We hope you enjoy this presentation. And Patrick, back to you.
All right, thanks, Gina. So, you know, if you're here today, it's probably because you're considering the idea of becoming accredited in public relations and want to learn a bit more about, you know, what it takes to become accredited. One of the best ways to increase your understanding of the APR is to have the opportunity to learn, you know, from the experiences of practitioners who have successfully gone through the accreditation process. For this reason, we have invited 3 accredited PR pros to join our conversation. Ann Buckley, who's currently the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at UC San Diego, Michelle Franklin, the Director of Communications for the Division of Physical Sciences at UC San Diego, and Anthony King, the Director of Communications for the Division of Arts and Humanities at UC San Diego. And Michelle and Anthony, thank you so much for being here today, and you know, just for your generosity in sharing your insights and all of your experiences that you went through with the APR journey. You know, now, before we begin our conversation with Anne, Michelle, and Anthony, I want to give you all a quick overview of how we'll be spending our time in today's session. I'll begin today's meeting with a brief 7 to 8 minute PowerPoint presentation where I will share some of the information you need to know before beginning your accreditation process. Once I've done that, we'll jump into the fun part where we'll have a conversation with our 3 panelists. And during this conversation, the 3 of them will be telling you what they went through and will also offer some tips that can help you along the way if you choose to embark in this journey. And finally, we'll have a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session where you can ask the speakers any questions you may have about the process. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat thread at any point in our meeting, or ask a question out loud by using the raise hand feature once we get to the Q&A. So having said all of that, let me share my screen so that we can begin our first section. So as most of you probably know at this point, the Accreditation in Public Relations, the APR, is a voluntary credentialing program, communication professionals that's, designed to test your knowledge of the PR and the communication skills in general that you need to provide value to the organizations you work for. Just like accountants get their CPAs and human resources practitioners get their SPHRs, the APR is our profession's gold standard for recognizing communicators who have demonstrated the drive, the professionalism, and the principles that set them apart from colleagues and just position them as leaders and mentors in our field. So regarding the why, you should get your accreditation. The nearly 4,900 communication professionals who currently have the APR will frequently mention three reasons. The first reason that typically comes to mind is that the APR has helped them boost their professional brand. Research has shown that accredited practitioners earn more money than their unaccredited counterparts. And there are currently some organizations that use the APR as a screening criterion for hiring and just professional advancement in general. A second reason that frequently comes up among APRs regarding the value of becoming accredited is that many have stated that kind of going through the accreditation process helped them define the way they practice public relations. As you begin to study for the APR, you'll notice that the APR process creates a framework for every communication initiative you implement. Going through that process also helps you develop an ethics-based skill set that allows you to implement, research-based programs that are either meant to increase awareness, influence attitudes, and ultimately change behaviors. I'd say that ultimately APRs join, when they enter this process, they join a cohort of professionals that are held to a higher level of standard. And finally, many APRs will note that pursuing the accreditation has given them personal satisfaction, just because it sharpens their knowledge and reflects their commitment to lifelong learning, to professional ethics, and to best practices. Once you get to the point where you feel like joining, the APR journey might be the right approach for you, you need to be aware that there are 4 steps that you will need to take. The first step, obviously, is to apply. The second step is to prepare your panel presentation. Third step is to complete a computer-based examination. And finally, once you've obtained your accreditation, the 4th step is to demonstrate your commitment to lifelong learning through a renewal of your accreditation. So what I want to do now is to briefly explain each of these 4 steps. Like I mentioned previously, the first step is to apply for the accreditation. The accreditation program is administered by the Universal Accreditation Board, which is comprised of 9 participating organizations, including PRSA. Anyone who's a member of one of these 9 organizations is eligible to seek accreditation. So if you're a member of PRSA or any of the other organizations, the fee to take the examination is $385. Now, those who aren't members can still take the accreditation exam, but will have to pay $745. It's also important to note that not everyone applies for the APR, right? Some will seek the APR plus M, which is an accreditation in public relations plus military communication. This accreditation is designed to encourage, just ongoing professional development among military public affairs officers. The second step is to study and sit for a panel presentation. Once your application has been approved, you have a full year to complete a two-step process to earn your accreditation. And the first step you will take is to go through a panel presentation. The panel presentation has two components: a presentation questionnaire you will have to answer, and the presentation itself. The presentation questionnaire is just a document you will need to write in which you'll answer questions about your organization, your role, your work experience. And in that document, which will be reviewed by a panel of 3 accredited practitioners, you will describe a public relations plan that you developed in the past. Candidates on average will say that they spend anywhere between 8 to 10 hours to complete the panel presentation questionnaire. Once they have finalized the questionnaire, the panelists will have about 15 business days to study the candidates' responses and prepare a list of questions or potential concerns to review with the candidate during the second component of this step, which is the panel presentation. Before the panel presentation, the candidates prepare a portfolio of materials that will help them explain a PR plan they have executed in the past. So, during the presentation, the panelists will listen to the candidate's presentation and we'll ask them, just a series of questions. Within 5 business days of that presentation, the panel chair sends an advance or not advance recommendation to the Universal Accreditation Board. Now, it's important to note that if you don't pass the panel presentation, you are given the opportunity to repeat the presentation after 90 days. So once you have passed the panel presentation stage, you jump into the examination stage, which is a 3-hour and 45-minute multiple choice exam. There are 132 questions on the examination, and the examination is separated into 6 categories of knowledge, skills, and abilities. So, if you look at these 6 categories, you'll immediately notice that they're not all given the same level of importance, right? So, it's important to note that, whereas 30% of the exam is based on your knowledge of research, planning, implementation, and evaluating programs, only 5% of the exam is based on your understanding of communication models, theories, and history of PR. So when you study for the examination, it's important to pay attention to these percentages because they'll just help guide you and get a better idea of how much time you should spend preparing for each. Now, if you pass this examination, you become accredited. If you don't pass the examination, you can retake it, but we'll have to resubmit a payment of $200. It's also important to note that once you become accredited, your APR journey doesn't stop. You have to meet renewal requirements every 3 years to keep your accreditation. Renewal can be achieved through, participating in industry events, giving back to, local accreditation programs, just lifelong learning and overall, a combination of all of these activities. The general idea behind, having to renew your accreditation every 3 years is just to keep professionals active, up to date, and, involved in the profession. So these were the 4 steps that I wanted to share with you. during this, first section of our presentation. What I want to do now is, take us to the second step of our conversation this afternoon, which is jumping into the conversation with our three speakers. And I'd like to begin by asking each of you, why becoming accredited was important to you, and why did you decide to become accredited? Michelle, let's start with you, and then we can have and Anthony share their thoughts as well.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me come speak. I'm happy to talk about my journey, especially since it's relatively fresh in my mind. But I think that I first really considered studying for APR. It was towards the end of 2020. So we were deep into the pandemic. And I think part of it was there's a feeling of being out of control of so many parts of your life. And I really saw this as something that I could do to take some control, especially because you're worried about what the financial future is or what is going to happen at your job or anything like that. So I really saw this as something I could do where I could have some control over what was happening in my career. So if I lost my job, I would be in a good position, I think, where I would have this extra set of skills that would make me more competitive. If I stayed in my job, it was great because then I would, again, still have these skills that would help me to do my work better. So I think it was really kind of pandemic fear probably that made me first consider doing it.
Great. Yeah. Pandemic fear was, I think, is definitely an important one for many people, during these past couple of years. And how about you?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here also. I got my accreditation in 2009, and I was at the time working at Virginia Commonwealth University, and my boss was an APR and just a powerhouse. And I remember, because I was in college at a time when public relations was not really, it wasn't really a discipline, and it's not because I'm that old, it's because PR is that new. It was not taught outside of journalism, right? And I went into journalism, and like a lot of people of a certain era, I came to public relations via journalism. I was a reporter and an editor, and so when I went to work with my boss at VCU, there was such strategy to everything she did. Everything she said, every activity she undertook, every problem she solved, there was strategy. And she kept encouraging me, get your APR, get your APR. It will change your life. And so I remember undertaking it, and I had children at home at the time, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to have time to do this. And it became a huge priority for me. And when I did it and passed the exam, it changed me from being a tactician and thinking tactically to being a strategist and thinking long-term, 30,000 foot, and going to strategy first and doing research before coming up with any tactics. And that, to me, is the difference between an APR and not having an APR.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that about joining from the journalism, because that's actually where I came from as well, as a writer and an editor. And I would say, so Michelle and I went through this process together. And let me actually just reiterate how important it was for me to have Michelle as a friend and colleague to do this with. And I would encourage you to consider that for you as well as a mentor. And we asked Anne to be our mentor in this process, which is also really, really important in the process for me. But in that moment in 2020, for me, in addition to sort of the fear and the lack of control of the pandemic, I also just sort of had this curiosity of what it was, because I didn't have the formal training and I didn't even understand what the definition of public relations was. And Anne joined us at UC San Diego at a really critical moment and was able to reorganize and have all of us sort of rethink what our job was and what it meant to be in public relations. And I think that was a really big impetus for me to do it.
Great. Yeah. So, I mentioned previously, that the panel presentation is, the first step in the accreditation process. How much time did you spend preparing for the panel presentation? How did you pick your topic for the presentation? And, what tips would you give someone who's beginning to prepare for the presentation? Anthony, how about we start with you on this one and then move forward with Anne and then Michelle.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked this question because I think in your opening you said average was 8 to 10 hours. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it certainly was more than that for me. I think that I spent a very large amount of time on the presentation, not necessarily putting it together, but thinking about what it was, thinking about what the questions, my answers would be to the questions. And the panel presentation is broken up into certainly the questionnaire is broken up into 2 different questions. And the first section is about you and your organization and your thoughts about the industry and your thoughts about what public relations could be. And I really enjoyed that part, and I wanted to take a little bit longer to do that. You asked, I think right now about, how did we choose the piece? That was really from a conversation with Anne and Michelle to try and even understand that the work that we were doing was considered strategic and did have a plan behind it. I think when I walked into the process, I didn't have the confidence to even, I remember asking, should I even be doing this? Am I even ready to do it? And I would share that, yes, you are ready to do this. Certainly if you're here today and curious about it, I think you're ready to do this. It will just force you to think differently about how you have everything set up. I picked a small, what I thought was a small project, a small communications plan, and workshopped it a little bit with Anne and Michelle and presented it that way. One tip that I will have is, because I took a little bit longer to do it, I wrote answered the questions for the panel questionnaire first, and then several months later went back to it. And this was what I think you'll find, is that my attitude had changed, my perception had changed, and my knowledge of what I could do in public relations had changed. And I would encourage you to just sort of be prepared for how that will flow for you in the process.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just, before we jump into Michelle and Anne, I'm just curious. You said that it took you way over 8 to 10 hours. Personally, when I took it, it took me way more than 8 to 10 hours as well. I'm just giving the statistics that are provided by PRSA, but I remember thinking the same thing you did. I spent at least, I can't remember now, but I'd say maybe 16 hours total, 17 hours, 18 hours, maybe 20, preparing that document.
Same. Yeah. It was the most important piece for me, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And then the other question that I'd like to just follow up with you is, when you pick that topic, how old was that topic? Did you pick something that you had just done or something that you did several years before? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, actually, yes. So it was actually an active communications plan for a small project. So I had put it together within a year, and I was able to say in the presentation when I was actually giving it with the, giving the presentation, this is an active plan. This is where we are now in the process. So within a year, I'd say.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Anne.
Yeah, I did not take that much time with my questionnaire. I think it was the wire service person in me. I was like, bam, 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 bam. And I wanted it done. I wanted it out of there. And I also was so sure in my opinions at the time. I probably answer it a lot differently now. But it was not as time consuming for me, particularly because the plan I used was was an awareness plan of of a university that was really suffering from VC who instead of VCU. And we were able to do some pretty impressive, well, under the tutelage of someone, we as French for my boss was leading it and I was a part of it. So it was very exciting. So it probably took me 4 to 6 hours to complete. But it makes you think. It makes you think about what you're doing and why you're doing, and to think more globally about the discipline itself. And the other thing, and I want to throw this in there, the entire process taught me that it's the science behind the art rather than, I think we live the art every day. There is true science behind all of it. And that's what I like about it. It's, and that's probably why I also get and take it very personally when someone says spin. I just want to put my foot down their throat and say, there's no spin here. It's research based. So anyway.
So for me, I don't know how long it took me. It took as long as it needed. I would say that's the attitude you should go into it with, whether it takes 6 hours to 20 hours to spend the time that you need to on it. And it obviously wasn't like I spent 4 hours one day and 4 hours. It was really broken up over a long time. So I would also say I was in a similar position to Anne. I probably slowed Anthony down, but I also have 2 kids. So I had and this was like in the pandemic, so I had a very full life. So it was hard for me to find time to study, to work on the presentation. I was really doing it in, whenever I could find, 15 or 20 minutes. I fell asleep reading the APR book like so many times because I was reading it at the end of the night when the kids were in bed. So maybe like I was having dreams about APR, I don't know. But for anyone who is in that situation where you have a busy personal life or you have a lot of work to do, you do get that whole year, use that whole year, take your time. You can do it. You don't have to like crank it out, right away. So take the time that you need, I would say. And yeah, so I don't know how long it took. I would say it probably took 15 hours or something like that, but I'm not really sure. Also, because it was kind of like, I think Anthony and I kind of did this, like, it wasn't like we're like, now we're just going to do the panel presentation part. Now we're just going to study. We were like reading the books through the whole thing. So we're reading the books, learning about what public relations really means. That's helping us put the presentation together. It's also helping us study. So it's all kind of, mixed together as well. In terms of the project that I chose, I think like Anthony, I was kind of like, I don't know, do I have something good? What am I going to talk about? And I ended up using a plan that I had done several years ago. So it was old, but I used it because I thought it was something that I could really talk about. Like, these are the steps we went through. This is what I've learned, where if I could do it again, I would change these things about it. I also had things that I could show in the portfolio, like, this is the news release, here's the social media, here's the media clip, that all of that sort of supplemental information that also gave me more to talk about. So it doesn't have to be something that you just did or that you're currently working on. Mine was a couple of years old, actually.
Yeah, great points. I know I said at the beginning of a conversation today that we take all the questions at the end, but I'm known for making a rule and then changing it. And I'm seeing some really relevant questions that I think are good to answer right now. One of them is from Amanda, who's saying, is it 8 to 10 hours at a time? I think, like Michelle was saying, it just depends on you, right? If you want to do it all at a time and that works for you, that could work. If not, if you need some time to process, it'll probably be done over, a couple of weeks, maybe more, just depending on how much time you have. And then we have another question about, when can you start the APR process? Can you apply at any time of the year? I don't want to say your name because I'm going to butcher it. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. So I'm just not going to say it. But that's a great question, and you can apply at any time of the year, whenever whenever is best for you. And what I'd also add, and any of you can just jump in and kind of share your thoughts on that as well, is sometimes it's even a good idea to do all of your studying and feel like you're prepared before you apply. Because, you know, some people can go through this process in a few months, and some people go through this process in several years, right? So it just all depends on how much time you have, you know, what your priorities are at a certain point in time. So, you know, I would suggest, you know, why not, you know, study, feel ready, and then you can apply, right? You don't have to, once you apply, you don't have to take a full year. You can apply and then get, you know, immediately started. So, you know, I don't see why it would be a mistake to kind of take the other approach, do the studying, and then kind of apply. I don't know, what do you all think about that?
Patrick, that's such a good point. I'd never really actually thought about that, but that allows for a little bit of time to be curious about defining how you would fit into public relations, to do that in advance. I did not. We decided, we applied, and then we started the process of studying and exploring. And I did take the whole year. In fact, Michelle, if you don't mind me saying, I know that you did as well, or almost the full year. And it didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel uncomfortable at all. It was perfect.
I think the first step for us, and I think we did this before we applied, but we read the APR study guide that's online, and that gives you a good baseline of information. I think it shows you kind of what you're in for if you're going to study and do the panel presentation. So I would certainly say if you're interested and you're worried about time at all, you can start with the APR study guide and read that, and kind of it will give you a sense of how much more work you may need to do before you actually apply.
Yeah. I agree with all that. So, you know, we've talked about the panel presentation, right? That first stage. Let's talk a little bit about the examination, the computer-based examination. How much time, you know, I'll ask you kind of the same question I did with the panel presentation. How much time did you spend preparing for that part of the examination? You know, and what tips, you know, would you give someone who's beginning to prepare for that part of the examination? You know, Anne, let's start with you here, and then move forward with Michelle and Anthony.
Thank you. I will echo what Michelle said. The APR study guide is your best friend. I mean, it really is. Not only is it interesting, but the whole exam is based on it, and it will take you through really in order the way you need to approach sitting for the exam. The other thing is pick a textbook. They give you some recommendations. The industry standard, or the Bible of PR, is the Cutlip Center and Broome Effective Public Relations, I believe. And it's gone through so many editions. I have several of them if anyone wants to borrow one, but you'll probably get newer ones at the library. You're going to have to read one. It's and I hated it. I don't like being a student, so it was and I'm in higher ed. But I took it everywhere with me, that book. My kids played travel baseball, and I was off to the side in my baseball chair reading my effective public relations. But if you do the study guide in one book, you'll be fine. There's practice tests online that are good to take. But there's also boot camps. There's APR boot camps around the country. I'm assuming they're online now too. We didn't have those at the time, but I probably would have benefited from that. But the one thing I would say about preparing for that exam is don't be intimidated by it, you know, and the panel presentation too. Everybody there wants you to succeed. It's not a challenge and a beat down and a chopped cook-off or something. It is we all want the more APRs, the better our profession. So, but I'm a little bit off track, but for studying, I even tell people who aren't studying for their APR, when they come to work for me, please read this study guide, you know, so at least I know you're familiar with these processes.
Yeah, great points. Great points. I forgot who I said was next. Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, I think Anne pretty much covered it, but I think whether you like to be a student, you probably know at this point what kind of test taker you are, even if it's been a long time since you've taken a test. So you can kind of remember I need this kind of preparation, or I'm this kind of studier, and you can just kind of rely on those old skills. So I just kind of went back to what I did in grad school, in terms of studying. But I think she's right. If you use the APR guide and then, the effective public relations book, that was really good. I think I borrowed all my books from Anthony. So I think there was another book that I read too, but I don't remember what it's called. And then Anthony had a bunch of books. So, you can really, I think, do a very deep dive if that's what interests you, but reading probably effective public relations is the key book to have to prepare for the test. And it didn't take, like, you get 3 hours and 45 minutes, you said. It didn't take that long. And again, that's going to be dependent on what kind of a test taker you are. I think it probably took me like 2 or 2.5 hours instead.
Mhm.
And right away, that's the other thing is, after you take the test, I mean, it's not official, but after you take the test, they will tell you on the screen, that you passed or not. And again, it's not official. You have to wait to get like the official email about it, but it's not like the SAT where they mail you your test score or whatever. When I took it, they mailed you your test score months later. So it's not like that. You'll know after you take it if you've passed or not. So that's important to remember.
So Michelle, I actually had more than just the 2 books, because
Yeah.
I went, that was the way that I studied, is I ended up getting all of the books that they recommended throughout the year. So it wasn't just something that I was cramming at the last moment. And part of that for me was that I really enjoyed reading about this perspective, and for example, this perspective of internal communications. And then I wanted to see how it was described in another book and another book. So that, I think, is just my, the way that I handled it. I will say that this was interesting, and it was kind of funny because at one point, Anne was mentoring us, and she said, don't worry about doing any of the reading, just get your presentation, get the questionnaire done. And both Michelle and I were like, oh my gosh, we've been reading these books for 3 months. Why, what have we been doing with our time? I probably wouldn't have changed it for myself, because I really found a lot of value in those books. I will say 2 in particular were probably not necessarily appropriate, or it didn't really prepare me for the exam in a way that I anticipated. However, I use those 2 weekly, monthly in my job now, and they were very specific to research and very specific to creating a strategic plan, walking you through the steps.
Perfect. Yeah. So, like everyone has been mentioning, Anthony read all of the books. Michelle and Anne didn't. It's important to note that, reading the books is important, but you don't necessarily have to read all of them. Don't feel like you have to, right? Anthony read them and it helped him and it's helping him at work. But like, Anthony added, some of them weren't necessarily completely applicable to the exam. So I think something that everyone has mentioned is that the Cutlip and Center Effective Public Relations book is a key book for that exam. Just because it takes everyone through the research, planning, implementation, and evaluation stages, which is a really important part to get your APR. It prepares anyone who's taking that exam pretty well to feel comfortable to take that exam. You've all mentioned so many great points. I will add, when you take this exam, don't feel like it's about memorizing facts. It's not. If you start reading books and you start taking notes and you start like memorizing everything that's in the book, that will not help you, and it will probably make you feel super frustrated when you take the exam, because it's not about memorizing facts. They're all, scenario-based questions, right? So you're put on in a situation, this is what's happening, what steps should you take, right? That's the type of question you'll be asked over and over and over again throughout the exam. So, please don't memorize things, understand them. And just always, I'd say, every time you read the newspaper, when you're kind of beginning to, prepare for the exam, always kind of begin to analyze it as, what would I do? What's going on with this organization right now? What would I do if I was in that case? How would we solve this? What type of research would I be conducting if I was facing that? How would I begin to, strategize this? What are the tactics I would implement? Doing that, that's what's really going to prepare you for the exam, because a lot of people end up being frustrated when they take the exam and sometimes don't pass it the first time, because they kind of memorize everything and then were completely shocked when they took the exam and saw that it had nothing to do with that. So that's just something to be mindful of when you prepare for the exam. And also don't give up if you didn't pass that first time. A lot of people don't pass the first time, take it again and pass the exam. It's not something to feel discouraged about. It's just something to just go back and think, okay, maybe, I didn't do this the right way this first time. Maybe I should come back and study a different way the second time. So, if you do take the exam, you didn't pass that first time, please don't feel discouraged and don't feel like this is something you can't do, because it is something you can. It's just maybe taking a different approach the next time you study. The last question I wanted to ask you all, before we jump into the Q&A, is just asking you about, and this is something we have been discussing, but becoming accredited takes us quite a bit of time investment. I think that a lot of people who haven't gone through this process are curious about whether or not this time investment is worthwhile, and if you would do it again, and just kind of why. And I see you raising your hand, so let's start with you on this one, and then we'll go with Anthony and finish with Michelle.
Thank you. I didn't mean to butt in. I'm passionate about the process itself of APR. And was it worth it? Absolutely. I think rather than framing my answer about was it worth it to me, I would say that it will be worth it to you all to do this, not only in your own confidence and your understanding of your role in the organization. It will elevate you. It will elevate how you participate in your organization. It will elevate how others you work with view you and your skill set. If I see an APR in a stack of resumes handed to me for consideration, that APR just comes right out of the pile immediately. They're getting an interview because more than anything, I know what they know. I know what they know, and that they would know what to do in XYZ scenario. I know that they're going to tell me something was effective, not because it got media coverage, but because it helped move the needle and help solve, it met the objective of the plan. And so I very much like that. It advanced me in my career in ways I never thought possible, but it's because of the confidence it gives you in your knowledge. You're not guessing anymore, and you're not solving for people's opinions of what a problem is. You're solving for research-based challenges that someone might say, oh, nobody knows who we are, we're the world's best kept secret. Well, in fact, no, you're not. Your story is told in multiple venues. You're not reading them all. Let me reflect your success, right? Things like that. So I would say that I hire APRs, I promote APRs, I value APRs, and if for nothing else, it's I know what you know, and I know that you're confident in what you know.
Yeah, let me continue that. That's such a good point, bringing it back to the service point, because for me, I found that it wasn't the switch at the end where I got the APR that it was effective. It was effective from the moment that I first started questioning what it was. And I would say that we're very proud to work at UC San Diego and very proud to work for a public institution. And I was able to apply what I was learning immediately to serve the area that I am serving, which really is ultimately our students, staff, and faculty. So it becomes in the moment, the realization that you feel more professional, you feel more confident, like Anne was saying, and I absolutely would not change it for anything. There was even a moment at the end where I got a little worried about the test just because of my own insecurities. And I thought, well, if I fail the test, I still have learned all the content. Please don't take that attitude. You will actually pass. But I think the lesson there is I was learning and using in the moment, and that was wonderful.
Yeah, I think to go back to what I said at the beginning, you know, I originally was studying for the APR as a way to have some control over my life at a time when I didn't feel like there was a lot of control. And I think it really bore fruit in that sense. Because I think a lot of times people come into public relations, like at least for me, it was kind of like an accident almost, like, how did I get here? This wasn't exactly what I was planning to do with my life. So I did have not necessarily feel as confident in my positions and then giving my opinion about certain things. And I think doing this, going through this process really gave me the words and the tools that I needed to be able to speak about things confidently and to have the knowledge to know that I was doing a good job. And even while I was studying for this process, I applied for a different position at UCSD. And I think the interview process, you know, I was really able to talk about my job in a much different way than I would have if I hadn't been studying. And I do think that helped me actually get the position just in the way that I was able to speak about the work that I was doing and that I thought I would do in the new position. So if you at all have like imposter syndrome or feel like you, you know, maybe don't know what you're doing, even if you do, you know, this process, I think really, really helps you just to have the confidence to say, I know what I'm doing. I belong here, you know, I know what I'm doing.
Wonderful. Yes. You all make so many great points. Thank you for that. It's 12:47. So let's jump into the Q&A session. There are some questions that have been asked already, so I'm going to start reading those. But if you all have any other questions, you know, just write them or raise your hand. You know, any way works. Gina asked, is the panel presentation in person or online as well, like the exam? Anthony, Michelle, you took this the exam recently, so maybe you can share your experience during the pandemic.
So it was there was the option to take it in person if you wanted to, and I can't remember where the testing center was. We're San Diego based, but I almost feel like it was up in LA. I don't actually know because
I think it was in Rancho Bernardo.
Oh, okay. And once I realized that those locations are really limited, I just took it online at home, which was a very complicated process. So please be prepared technically for that. That was more stressful than the test, I will say.
Yeah, and go ahead, Michelle. I
was just going to say the panel presentation was online too. Oh, yeah. I don't know if that is going to start to pivot because previously it was always in person, I believe, right? So I don't know if they're going to start doing both now or if it's going to stay virtual or not. But for us, it was a virtual presentation too. And I also took the test online. It can be complicated. There's like various security things you have to go through too, and all of that. So.
I love the panel presentation being virtual because my panelists were from all over the country and from all over different industries. In fact, I've even had one of them reach out to me privately after the panel presentation, asking for a little bit of tip of getting into San Diego media. And we, are talking about meeting up for coffee when they're in town. So that really was a great networking moment. That was my plug for doing it online.
Perfect. Yes. Regarding the panel presentations, we're currently at a point where it's kind of open to each particular kind of chapter. Some are doing it in person, which was the way that it was always done pre-pandemic. These panel presentations were always conducted in person, but after the pandemic, and during the pandemic, I should say, everything kind of changed, and we're at a point where it kind of depends on where you are exactly, but some are continuing to do this online, the panel presentations, and some are doing them in person. Kathy asked, and this is a question to Anthony. What were the 2 books that you found most helpful?
Oh, I was just typing that back to Kathy. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the chat. So I actually have them in front of me here. In addition to the APR study guide that we've mentioned, absolutely effective public relations. That's the Cutlip and Center that both Anne and Michelle mentioned. And then the other one that I really liked is the title is Public Relations, and the author's last name is Kelleher. And this is a newer one on their list. I don't think this was on a prior list for them. So those 2 I really enjoyed in preparation for the exam. And then the one that I find now most important in what I do every day is Strategic Planning for Public Relations. This is by Ronald Smith. And it's this huge, super impressive book that has a lot of tips and tricks, and tricks isn't the right word, but a lot of tips and guides about how to look at your publics and prioritize them. What exactly is a objective? What's a goal? All of those types of things. I use that all the time.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Amanda's asking, if we have a strong strategic background, is there a different approach for this? I can't remember what we were talking exactly at that point in time, but I'm assuming Amanda means I guess your approach to studying for the exam. You know, if you have a strong strategic background, does that impact the way you would study?
No, I would just encourage you to build on it. To me, the APR is all about strategy. That's really what it is. It's understanding strategy.
Yeah, you might find it easier than somebody who's maybe coming at it without that background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Barb is asking, I've seen some job postings that list the APRs are strongly encouraged to apply, but it's not common. For hiring managers, should that be something we advocate for? And I know you're going to say yes.
I answered it there. Sorry.
Let me, Patrick, if you don't mind, let me look at it this way, because I know that there's someone who joined earlier who's a student here at UC San Diego. She's an intern of mine here in the School of Arts and Humanities. So we don't have, obviously, the requirement of an APR for any type of an internship, but we're looking at our internships different. I'm looking at our internships differently based on what I've learned in the APR process. And my hope is that our interns, she in particular, will be able to look at the way that we're structuring the internship and apply that into how she will then apply for jobs after university. And perhaps if she's interested in public relations, to do her own APR. So it's kind of a flip on the question, but
yeah. Great point. Another question. For those who are certified, how did you pay for the course? Were you able to work with your supervisor, department, to receive financial support?
Yeah, at UC San Diego, I pay for the memberships for any direct reports into our shop. We pay for the PRSA membership, both local and national, and then we will pay for the APR process, including one test.
Yeah, at the time I applied, I didn't actually work under Anne directly, so I didn't benefit from that, but I did work with my own supervisor to ask for it to be covered as part of professional development. So I would absolutely encourage anyone to speak to their supervisor and talk about the benefits of going through this process and why it benefits the company. Absolutely,
yeah.
You know.
Well, and I would also add, I actually got additional support from the area that I support because it gave me access to the PRSA webinars, and I use those in my own personal professional development, in particular, their diverse dialogue series, in particular, everything that they're doing with equity, diversity, and inclusion and communications. That was a big ask that I had from my area that they were able to support.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Our next question is, what are the continuing education requirements once you've received your APR? And you've experienced the whole APR process for a longer period of time. Can you take that question?
Sure. And I put a link in earlier to the APR process, and it's outlined there, but it's essentially showing and serving not just PRSA. So appearance on this panel today is a credit, right, toward reaccreditation or maintenance. Community service, I wound up doing a strategic communications plan for a this is before GoFundMe, but this was for a family where there was some cancer in the family and they were looking at, so I helped with them and putting that strategic communications plan together. What it counted, it was community service. I did one for my church back in Birmingham, counted as service. Ethics, any kind of discussion around ethics, continuing education. There are some webinars, and when you look through the PRSA website in the APR, they will, when you see the webinars, it will say how many points it goes toward accreditation, right? Attending conferences, whether it's a PRSA conference or a communications conference in your field, that counts also. So there are multiple opportunities to earn your credits, really just by doing your job and then engaging with your community or teaching. Teaching is also very helpful. Mentoring candidates will earn you a credit also.
Absolutely. Another question we have, are there any requirements you must meet before you can apply for APR? I can take that one. To apply for the APR, it is recommended that you have 5 years of professional experience. If you are, just finishing college, and just entering the workforce, getting the APR is probably not the right moment for you. PRSA does offer other options for you. So there's the certificate of principles of public relations that anyone who's 6 months away from graduating or 6 months after graduating can get that certificate. It's kind of a first step toward the accreditation. You're not accredited when you take that certificate, but it's great for anyone who's just getting started in the field to just differentiate yourself from your peers. So the certificate in principles of public relations for those of you who are might be just beginning to work in PR is a good approach. But what is recommended is 5 years of professional experience. You can technically submit your application if you have fewer years of experience, and it would just depend on what the Universal Accreditation Board decides. But if you have 5 years of experience, you should be good to go. Regarding beginning this accreditation process. I don't know if any of you want to add anything to that.
No, thank you, Patrick.
Okay. All right. So it's almost 1 o'clock. So we've reached the point where we have to finalize this conversation. Anthony and Michelle, thank you so much for doing this. We all appreciate you sharing all of your insights so much. They're so helpful for anyone beginning this process. And before finalizing, Anne told me before we began, Patrick, don't forget to mention that this is APR month. I did not forget, Anne. So we're celebrating APR. This is the month of April, and we just kind of encourage any of you who are going through this process or thinking about beginning your APR process to just go for it. You have nothing to lose and a lot to win. So with those words, I will say goodbye to everyone. Again, thank you so much for coming. And please feel free to contact us should you have any further questions. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.